Space age has been bestowed upon us, and as part of that bestowment, we now have some new challenges and puzzles that we need to solve. One of those puzzles, the planet of Fulgora, is a mathematical puzzle appealing and diabolical in equal measures. And as someone who likes to think of himself as a mathematician, we could swap the word think in that sentence for delude, it has grabbed me pretty hard. And this is before we throw a bit of quality into the mix, before we mention the island structure of this planet, and straight lines, foundations. There is a lot to discuss, so let us begin the same way we always begin. 1. The beginning. Our travails on this planet begin and end with a single recipe. This one right here, the one with all the percentages. This one recipe is going to determine every single thing we do on this planet. We mine some scrap, which is the only resource we have access to. We do also get oil from the ocean, but this is basically free and everywhere. So how important is it really to factory design? We process that scrap through a recycler, it rolls a dice, and it gives us one of these items. If we process a lot of scrap, then the distribution of the items we receive should match these percentages. Some of the items we receive we want, some of the items we receive we don't want. These are the easy ones. Some of the items we receive we want some of, but not all, and some of the items we want we don't get, and we need to get them either by scrapping an item that contains that thing, or rebuild it from the scrap we are given, or the scrap we scrap, or the scrap we scrap from the scrap. We are going to say the word scrap a lot of times in this video. You better get used to it. Dear YouTube, I'm not saying a naughty word, I promise. How we determine which items are which items do we keep or not keep or rebuild, is a problem both in the maths of the factory and in the actual building of the factory. It is both a diabolical mathematical problem and a diabolical factory problem. Even if we are able to do one of those things, the maths or the building, it doesn't necessarily mean we are able to do both. And the main problem we are going to have is not the main problem we have in other places in Factorio. Our main problem on Fulgora is that we have too much stuff. Our factory must grow, right? Well, what if growing a factory overloads its throughput capacity? What if growing the factory breaks the factory? Welcome to Fulgora. 2. The maths. The mathematics of any particular Factorio problem are generally something I cover at the mid to end point of these videos. I don't want to throw you into the deep end right off the bat, but on Fulgora, without discussing the maths, we are blind. So, at the risk of everyone switching off the video at this moment, we start with the maths, or at least the first part of the maths. On a moment-to-moment basis, what we will need in this factory will change. We might design it to be SPM perfect at some point in the future, but we would also want it to make other things along the way. Recyclers, EM plants, Tesla turrets, quality modules. The problem is too much stuff. The problem is that at one moment we might need a thing and the next we won't. So at the most basic of starting points, we need to be able to scrap every last thing we produce, because every last thing in this factory could be scrap and every last thing in this factory could be critical depending on the moment. This is the premise for this spreadsheet. This spreadsheet calculates all the things we get as a result from processing the scrap. It also does it for quality. We'll be covering quality later. For now, we're just doing one dot, so all these percentages are 0 for the moment. We enter a number here for the amount of scrap per second we can expect to process. This is a mostly theoretical number, mainly because the performance of our factory is determined by the slowest bottleneck or choke point, and so this number could be affected by a lot of things, but we got to start somewhere. By processing this number of scrap per second, we can expect this distribution of things. This is the primary scrap. We also have access to a bunch of other items when we scrap this primary scrap, listed down here, the secondary scrap. The amount of secondary scrap we have is solely dependent on how much primary scrap we scrap. If we are keeping all the primary scrap, then we won't have any secondary scrap. They are inversely affected by each other. More of one, less of the other. Every single thing listed in this spreadsheet needs to be scrapped. We need to be able to take the entire production capacity of this factory and scrap it. All of the recyclers we need to do that job are listed down here. This is the starting point. Before we are able to do anything else, we need a factory which can process a bunch of scrap and then scrap a bunch of scrap.
Scrap, scrap, scrappity scrap, scrappity scrap, scrap, scrap.
3. Sorting and scrapping. If you have seen my quality video, then the topic of these two things will be familiar. I'm going to try and cover the basic principles of these topics here, but know that if you need more detail, I would recommend watching that quality video. If you have watched that video, this is the timestamp to skip this particular section, but be aware that some of this is new because the sushi is different. We have sushi. Anything in that sushi has the potential to back up everything else in that sushi. If we need a particular thing and it is on a sushi belt, but we have too much of another thing on that same sushi belt that we aren't using or scrapping, then we won't be able to get access to the thing that we need. The abundant thing will back up the important thing. And we can't scrap sushi. If we scrap sushi, then we run the risk of scrapping a thing that we actually need. Remember, what we need will change from moment to moment. It won't always be the same. Let's say we have too many circuit boards in this moment, so we build a system that siphons off the circuit boards and relieves the pressure. But in the next moment we have too much stone, so we build a system that siphons off the stone, scraps it, and we find ourselves with too much copper. We will always end up in a situation where we need to build the potential to scrap every last thing in the factory, and we will always be in a situation where we need to sort that sushi. It is the inevitable endpoint, so we just don't build it at the end. Sorting on Fulgora, for me, is a simple case of building a conveyor belt loop with a series of splitters that removes one specific item from the sushi and puts it into a bus. This spreadsheet lists 16 or 17 items depending on whether we want to count stone blocks. A bus with 16 or 17 conveyor belts is not an unreasonable bus. We then give each one of those conveyor belts the option to split if it overflows, and send that option to a bank of recyclers that matches the number listed in the spreadsheet for that specific item. Or we take that item and turn it into something else and then scrap that something else, like steel into a box or concrete into hazard concrete. These mechanisms aren't listed in the spreadsheet. I should probably do that. To get the best of some of the new systems in Factorio, we need to be able to embrace perpetuality. We are getting a lot of sushi from recycling the scrap. Some of it we need and some of it we don't. If we aren't ridding the system of the stuff we don't want, then we won't get the stuff we do. So we need to be able to perpetually process that material. The splitter that gives the conveyor belt the option to be scrapped if it overflows, we'll call it the critical splitter, I'm going to refer to it later, is the boundary between the perpetual motion and the jammed belts. On the sorting widget side of this splitter, we want perpetuality, and on the factory side, we want jammed belts. This is the basic structure of factory we need to build before we can do anything productive with the material we are making. Scrap arrives on a train. It gets processed into sushi. The sushi gets sorted onto its respective belt. Each belt is given the option to be scrapped if it overflows, and then the scrap we get from the overflow needs to be routed back to the beginning to be sorted again, probably with priority over the scrap from the trains. This is the basic perpetual system that we need to build. Then and only then can we actually use the scrap. And how do we use that scrap? We build a factory. You know what you're doing there. 4. Wallity. The great opportunity that all of this scrap represents is in quality. Because the system is so simple, we are processing a single thing from a single type of ore patch, because our problems are generally in having too much stuff, which is just dying to be upcycled. Because the items we get are so complex and would otherwise require a lot of factory to produce, if we do it correctly, we can scale quality in ways that are not possible on other planets. We do have to contend with the natural geography of the planet, which does not automatically invite a big complex factory, particularly not with straight lines. So I tend to think there are two approaches we can use. We can get foundations and brute force a big factory, or we can do sushi and work within the geography we are presented with. Let's address them one at a time. 5. Brute force. The brute force approach that I have used is really just a natural extension of the system I have already explained. We mine some scrap, we process that scrap, we send that scrap to a widget to be sorted, and then we give all that scrap the option to be scrapped. Except now we are talking quality. So instead of 16 to 17 conveyor belts in a bus, we are talking potentially 5 times that, so 80 to 85, if we only want a single conveyor belt for each thing. But some of these things are very abundant. Some of these things will require more than one belt. I'm looking at you, copper cables and green circuit boards and gears. I think that's all the most painful ones. That is a big bus. It is going to need a lot of foundations. Going back to the spreadsheet and entering all the max qualities that can be expected, the rest of the spreadsheet now populates and we can see what we can expect from the perpetual scrap system. Let's go through this spreadsheet in a bit more detail. We put quality modules in the mining drills that are mining the scrap. These mining drills will output a distribution of quality scrap, this distribution. We then process that distribution in recyclers with quality, and that outputs another distribution of stuff. We process the 1.ore and we get this distribution. We process the 2.ore and we get this distribution. 3.ore is this distribution. 4 and 5.ores are these distributions. We are taking each quality of scrap that we get from the mining drills and then mathematically analysing each one of those one at a time. The total amount of scrap, all of the things we get just by mining with quality and recycling with quality, are listed in this table. This table is all the other 5 tables added together. This table shows all the raw material that we have access to, or at least the material we have access to directly from the scrap ore. Secondary scrap is also updated with quality. The same applies to this secondary scrap as before, just with 5 qualities. If we want to use this stuff, then we need to deduct it from the primary stuff. The more secondary stuff we need, the less primary stuff we'll have, etc., etc. Now, brute force is brute force. There isn't a lot of nuance here. We need a lot of foundations, and foundations require us to get to a kilo, so we can't just use brute force quality on Fulgora the moment we land. Foundations are also expensive and require resources from multiple planets to be shipped to a single location, and then time. A lot of time. Brute force does allow us to impose our will on Fulgora, allow us to completely ignore the oil lakes and build whatever factory our heart desires, but it comes at a heavy cost. Research, resources, and time. And let's be honest, we have been set a challenge here. A planet made of small, horribly shaped islands surrounded by seas of oil and encumbered by cliffs. The brute force approach does get the job done, but it doesn't really address the problem in the way it is presented. It would be nice to have a design philosophy that achieved quality but worked within the island structure. Something with a bit more flavour. 6. Sushi. This is really what we are here to discuss. Everything you have watched and heard so far is really just an introduction as to why sushi quality is the way to go. Fulgora places significant limitations on what we are able to achieve by the nature of its island structure, but it also represents significant opportunity in its abundance of otherwise difficult to get resources. And the way to get the most out of these things is with sushi, in my humble opinion. The proposal I'm going to set out is as follows. We build a factory on an island and all it does is process 1.scrap. If we want to build a mall or science or EM plants or any of the other things we are going to need, then it gets built on this island, for the time being, for the moment. But we also want quality in the mining drills and in the recyclers. We need to max quality as much as we can. So any quality that we happen to produce on this 1. Island gets sent to a second island, a quality island. Quality island only deals with 2. to 5. stuff. There should be no 1. stuff here, or at least not in the general factory. We will need some 1. stuff. We'll come to this a bit later. We take that jumbled up sushi, run it through almost the exact same sorting widget as earlier to put a single ingredient on a single belt, but we keep all the qualities of a single item together. We want all 2 dot to 5 dot gear wheels on its own conveyor belt, 2 dot to 5 dot copper cables on its own conveyor belt, etc. This is the sushi we will be dealing with. Now, the problem, or at least one of the problems, with sushi like this is that we can't just direct it at a bank of machines in the normal manner and expect it to just work. If we do this, then the sushi will jam on whatever quality happens to be in the way. What we need to do is present this sushi to the machines so that we fill up the conveyor belts and the machines with as much stuff as they can hold, and then remove everything that is left. When we do this for all separate qualities, then we end up with systems like these. If we are doing a sushi base, like I am setting out here, then at each and every place that we need that ingredient, we need to route it through one of these systems, or something which performs the same function, and then extract everything that is left at the end. Once that ingredient has worked its way through all the processes that need it, such that we can determine that everything still on the belt is not required by the factory, we scrap it. This is another big change to the design of our factory. Whereas before we were sorting and scrapping at the beginning of our factory, this gave us control over all the flows in the factory that followed after the critical splitter. Now we are sorting at the beginning and scrapping at the end. There is no critical splitter because it is sushi and we can't scrap sushi, or at least we don't want to until we know we don't need it. We also have some big changes in the bus. We are no longer splitting a belt to go to a particular process, but directing everything at a particular process. At every place that a specific ingredient is required, we need to route the entire factory production of that item through one of the systems I showed earlier, one of these, and then when we are done, route the entire thing back into the bus to go to the next process that needs that ingredient. FYI, this is why I have different orientations for these sushi sorting systems, because the direction of flow, if we don't want the belts to overlap in the bus, is really important. If the direction of flow that we need is moving from the top of the screen to the bottom, then we can use either one of these setups. If the direction of flow is the opposite, from the bottom of the screen to the top, then we would need to use the bottom setup. Keeping the conveyor belt system simple and straightforward is always on the forefront of my mind. Getting this flow direction right makes things a heck of a lot easier. Things don't stop here. Land area is not abundant on Fulgora, and what land we do have is awkward. If there are opportunities to save space, even if it makes our factory a little more complicated, then we should take them. These sushi sorting systems that I keep showing are capable of performing the exact same function with split belts. We can place sushi on one side of the belt and place sushi of a different ingredient on the other side of the belt, and the sorting process and the excess, removing of the excess process will still happen. Imagine a process that requires 4 ingredients. If we were using one sushi sorting system per item, then that would require 4 sushi sorting mechanisms, which is some serious chonk. If we use split belts, then we halve that number. We only need 2. This is a huge saving not just in factory area, but also in general complexity, to the factory block anyway. Now, in the bus, things are a bit more complicated because we need to not only join the belts together to make the split belt to go through the factory in the first place, but also take it apart when it comes back and re-jamble it in the process. We still aren't done. When we start out on Fulgora, we are not going to have all the things we need to make a super duper quality factory. We are going to be quality limited, mostly by modules. To start with, this quality island is going to be operating on crumbs. What if we fed it with more crumbs? We have access to many islands. There is nothing stopping us from more or less duplicating the one-dot factory we have already built somewhere else and feeding the quality we get from that factory to our quality island also. We could have many one-dot feeder factories. And whilst we are talking about many islands, we could also, probably if we ran out of space, take all the quality we were intending on scrapping at the end of our quality island, put it on a train, send it to another island, resort it, and continue building more quality factory. This material was all going to be scrapped anyway, so why not use it on other things? In this way, what I am presenting, I hope, is a factory system that includes quality that can be built on a tight footprint that can operate on multiple islands, as many islands as we can imagine, and can provide us with all the quality things we need on our journeys beyond Fulgora. A system that works within the confines of the problem we are presented with and exploit it to the maximum as we can. But 7. Sushi limitations. I would imagine some of you are screaming throughput at me. That's what I would be doing. We are taking the entire quality production of a particular item generated from potentially multiple islands. Sure, they might be crumbs, but enough crumbs make a sandwich, and then we are placing all of that sushi on half a conveyor belt. We are capping the max throughput of any one particular item at 30 items a second if we are using green conveyor belts, and if they are unstacked. 120 if they are stacked. And this is the first most obvious potential improvement that can be made to this system. Just stack everything. We would need to do Gleba. So once again, this isn't really available when we first land on Fulgora, I guess, unless you do Gleba beforehand, in which case use Psycho. Stacking the ingredients is the first most obvious improvement that can be made here. But is that even enough? Are we going to be making more than 120 of any particular single ingredient? Probably. Once we reach that point, we basically have to accept that we aren't going to be routing everything through a process. Some quality things that we might have been able to use that the factory might have needed are going to be scrapped. If we have things on a single belt, then we can use a splitter, just like in a normal factory, to send stuff to the factory process and then join the excess further down in the bus. The same as we were doing before, basically, just linked with some splitters and a belt in the middle. If we are sorting things onto two belts, then we can join those two belts together at the position of splitting, take one of the belts to the process, leave the other one in the bus, and reinstate them both when it returns with the excess. The more belts we use here, the more complicated it becomes, and the more losses we will experience. Fundamentally, what I am trying to present here is a system that, in area terms, sits somewhere between gambling and brute force full Monty. If you have done gambling and want a system with a bit more oomph, then sushi quality is the way to go. But if you have done sushi quality and still want more oomph, then you really need to be doing brute force full Monty. That is the only real way to get proper throughput. Everything else is a compromise. Throughput isn't the only limitation though. Remember I mentioned that this is a quality island and that no one dot should exist here? Well, this is where it bites us. For a start, if we want to transport any of the quality things we make on Quality Island into space, then we are going to need rocket silos, and we are going to need all the one dot ingredients to make rocket parts, blue circuit boards, rocket fuel, and low density structure. For my part, I have a train which picks up the raw ingredients for rocket parts from the first one dot island and transports it solely to the rocket silos on the Quality Island. This isn't a terrible problem to fix. More trains equals more gooder, am I right? But we might also need one dot iron plate for sulfuric acid if we are rebuilding blue circuit boards and or batteries. Not a lot, but enough to be annoying. For my part, I am doing this currently by hand, which, has obvious flaws. But particularly if you've built this awesome little sushi factory in a multiplayer server, and so people are going to be constantly online, and that iron plate is going to constantly run out, and nobody else is going to refill it because I haven't told anyone this is a problem. Not that they probably would fix it anyway. So some blue circuit boards that I could be making aren't, and I am scrapping some green and red circuit boards kinda needlessly, which is nice. I guess the main problem we are going to experience with this kind of factory setup is that as we improve things, as we get better modules and better buildings and better tech, we are going to be processing more and more sushi, and somewhere at some point something is going to break. We are going to have too many crumbs. This is the problem with Fulgora. It is inescapable. 8. Design consequences. The system I am proposing will do the job. It will sort and route all the things to the places they need to go to. It will use those resources, and it will self-balance, trashing everything at the end. But there are consequences. I'm going to try and explain those consequences, or at least the ones I've been able to find. For a start, because we are sending all resources to each process in a particular sequence, priority is naturally given to processes which are addressed first. This isn't actually all that different to normal Factorio. When we have a series of processes all being addressed by a single belt with splitters, the first processes in that series will have a natural priority over everything else that follows. This isn't really a new phenomenon, but it is a lot more pronounced with Sushi. Now, it isn't really something that can be avoided, but it is useful to know. If there are things that are more important to you than other things, then build those things closest to the sorting widget at the beginning of the factory. Second, this system works really well, more or less, with all the primary and secondary scrap listed in the spreadsheet. If it comes off a train, then we are generally all good, but we also have to make a series of intermediate products: engines, electric engines, refined concrete, etc. When stuff arrives on our train to our quality island, we can't really control how much actually arrives. These are gifts from the gods, and we can really only be thankful for receiving them at all. But the moment we start diverting all that stuff to processes, then the natural architecture is going to dictate what happens to it. Processes early in the factory, close to the widget, will get priority, and as we work our way through the factory processes, we'll receive less and less stuff. These intermediate processes, and by that I mean things that don't arrive on a train, but also don't go into a box either. I'm assuming we store all our finished items in boxes. These intermediate products will switch on and off as and when the materials arrive, and that is dictated by things we can't control. They can potentially be permanently on or permanently off. Permanently off isn't necessarily a problem, but permanently on is. Let's take pipes. A pipe takes a single ingredient, iron plate, and makes a pipe in a very small amount of time. Let's assume that pipes are only going to a single place, engines. We send a sushi of quality pipes through engines, and we scrap everything that comes out at the end. With the way this is set up, even if we don't need engines, we are still going to be making and scrapping pipes. And because we are sending all iron to the pipe process, and because pipes are so damn quick to make, the process of making pipes has the potential to absorb every single piece of iron that we send it. And if we don't need them, then they are just going to get scrapped, which is technically upcycling and so not terrible, but every single process that follows in the factory that needs iron plate is never ever going to get any. We need to be able to switch pipes off when the engine process is saturated. I do this with a couple of circuit conditions. I detect how many pipes we have on the belt that feeds engines, and if it is above a certain number, I then switch off the iron feeding the pipes. This is obviously with quality, so a couple of circuit conditions for each quality, but it works well. It is a little painful. We are still scrapping pipes, and that is both not a bad thing. We are upcycling at the end of the day, which will produce higher quality things eventually, but also very much a bad thing. It is still an overall loss to the factory. Now, for something simple like an iron pipe, these bad things are easy to ignore. What is a couple of pieces of iron plate lost for a factory that is producing such valuable units? At the end of the day, pipes go into engines, engines go into electric engines, and electric engines go into spaceship parts, asteroid collectors, crushers, thrusters. If we are losing a few pieces of quality iron plate, but making a few high quality things in return, then that is almost certainly an acceptable loss. But it isn't necessarily the case for more expensive things. Earlier in the video, I said, once that ingredient has worked its way through all the processes that need it, such that we can determine that everything still on the belt is not required by the factory, we scrap it. The thing I didn't mention was time. We send a thing through a process, and at that moment in time we don't need it, but by the time that thing works its way to the end of the factory to be scrapped, we might need it again. The system I am proposing would not currently be able to make use of that. The problem with Fulgora is too much stuff, and if we were to try to make use of this stuff that would otherwise be scrapped, with something like a loop, for example, we would start dealing with reciprocal flows. and that very much has the potential to break the factory big time. If we aren't removing stuff from these potential loops as quickly as stuff arrives, then more stuff is being put on the loop than being removed, and it jams. Simple as that. Building a system that manages these reciprocal flows for each and every item that arrives on this quality island, I don't believe is possible or even worthwhile, to be honest. But it might be for a few critical intermediate products. Things like the superconductor and the supercapacitor, the spicy batteries as I call them. They carry a lot of value. We might want to harness the reciprocal flows for items like these. The harnessing takes place as follows. These important items now exist on a conveyor belt loop, addressing all the factory processes that need a spicy battery as an input, but never directly being scrapped. The conveyor belt loop acts as a giant buffer, absorbing the qualities we happen to produce on a moment-to-moment basis, distributing those qualities to the processes that need it, and then taking the excess of what those processes throw back at us. This loop will jam eventually. We have two choices. We can either limit the amount of stuff we make so that we don't overload the loop, or we remove the excess of what happens to be on the loop, or maybe even a combination of both. One way or another, we need to moderate the stuff on the loop because at some point it will jam. This is the most efficient way of building a sushi factory, a fully moderated, balanced sushi loop, at least as far as I see things, which, might not be all that far when it comes down to it. The potential here is enormous, and there are a lot of you out there. My way is just one way. 9. The maths. Again, if our overriding, inescapable issue on Fulgora is too much stuff, then we really need to be able to calculate or predict what our flows are going to be if we are going to avoid breaking our factory. And that is why I made the spreadsheet. It is not perfect by any means. There are significant issues with it, which I'm about to get into, but it is at the very least a good starting point. But there is a really good reason why this is the only spreadsheet I'm going to link in the description. There is a really good reason why this only tells the story up to the scrapping and does not include for any kind of SPM analysis. I just don't know how to calculate Fulgora's science. I haven't been able to penetrate the armour of it yet. That yet implies that I will be able to solve it at some point. I don't know that this will be the case. Let me explain. I have Factory Planner. For those unaware, Factory Planner is a mod that lets us plan out a factory with consideration of the numbers but without actually calculating them. We can build a process or series of processes in the mod, and it will present all the associated numbers attached with that recipe or series of recipes. I can build the processes for a perfect science ratio in the Factory Planner, and it will tell me all the things I need to make per second to make that science. One of the things I need to make will be iron plate, and it will tell me how much iron plate I need to make. I'm just using iron plate as an example because for me it is the most devious, but this will be true for all secondary scrap. We do not get iron plate from processing the scrap ore. It is not a primary item. We get iron plate by processing other things: gears, batteries, green circuit boards. But green circuit boards are also a secondary scrap item. We get them by scrapping blue and red circuit boards. Red circuit boards are kind of both primary and secondary in that we get them from the scrap ore, but we also get them from scrapping blue circuit boards. If I need a certain amount of iron plate to achieve a certain amount of SPM, then I need to be able to not only calculate the perfect numbers of things that need to be scrapped and kept and rebuilt, but also build a factory which perfectly orchestrates those numbers. We also need to be able to calculate how much iron plate we are going to be extracting to rebuild those green circuit boards and gears, maybe not gears, and batteries. And some of those green circuit boards are going to go into rebuilding red and blue circuit boards. If I wanted to be able to calculate some kind of perfect SPM to iron plate ratio, then I would need to be able to calculate all of these flows which are associated with iron plate. I can't currently see how that is possible. And this is just iron plate, a single item of between 16 and 17 other various items, not including quality. There might be a few of you out there who are able to do the mathematics involved with solving this. This might be a simple problem to you. I've seen someone mention a matrix. I've done matrix manipulation. I absolutely do not want to have anything to do with it ever again. If you are able to solve it, make a video or hit me up and I'll make a video, because it is a problem I want to see solved. I just have absolutely no idea where I would start with it. So that is how we get a fundamentally flawed spreadsheet. The iron plate that I have listed here is only achievable if we scrap every last gear and battery and green and red and blue circuit board in the entire factory. It is an absolute maximum, because at this moment in time, that is all I am able to care about. If I know what the absolute maximum could be, and I design the factory for that worst case, then the factory will, at the very least, not break. It might not produce the optimum amount of SPM for the amount of scrap I am inputting, but it will at least produce that science perpetually, if required. Because, at the end of the day, Fulgora is two problems. How do we calculate the perfect maths, and how do we build the perfect factory? And if I'm going to solve one of those problems, I will take the factory one. A factory not breaking, but with slightly imperfect maths, is better to me than a factory with perfect maths, but one that keeps going wrong. Welcome to Fulgora. Alright then, I just want to say a big thank you to all of my Patreons who are supporting me on this YouTube Factorio journey. Yep, thank you. I love you all. You are great. If you want to join the club, then come visit me at patreon.com/anotherbigfoot. Otherwise, that's it. I will see you in the next video. Ta-ra.